In pre-industrial Europe, butter stayed tied to the calendar. Cows gave the most milk when grass returned, and that meant the richest butter season arrived and faded each year. Families who kept animals turned milk into butter quickly because it spoiled fast. Nothing about it came easy. It took time, steady hands, and enough surplus to risk turning drinkable milk into a luxury fat. That labour landed hardest on farms. Cream had to be gathered, saved and churned, and the work had to fit around planting and harvest. Without modern cooling, every delay cost quality and quantity. So butter stayed limited, especially outside peak months. When it moved toward towns, the price climbed again through transport and middlemen. In the city, butter often arrived as something you paid extra for or went without. And that gap mattered. In many households, daily cooking depended on cheaper fats or thin substitutes, while butter marked meals that looked and felt well off. It ended up as a quiet class signal, not because it was rare everywhere, but because it was hard to make, hard to keep, and costly to buy at the wrong place and time. Butter separated diets the way wages separated lives. Once railways spread, butter stopped being trapped by distance and seasons. Farmers and small creameries sent churned butter to towns that once relied on whatever arrived by cart. Travel times shrank from days to hours, and spoilage mattered less. Supply widened, then widened again. That shift changed butter's role overnight. It moved from a local fragile product to something that could be shipped, stacked and sold to strangers. Refrigeration pushed that change further. Cold storage and chilled rail cars let butter wait, travel farther and arrive in more predictable condition. Traders built larger routes, linking countryside production to city demand and even to ports. Butter started crossing borders in bulk, not just as a premium specialty. With that scale came standard grades, regular deliveries, and bigger buyers who demanded consistency. Butter began behaving like a modern commodity. As trade expanded, price stopped being purely local. Cities and trading centres set reference prices that rippled outward, and markets began to move together. Newspapers printed butter quotes alongside other essentials because readers understood what it meant for the household. Politicians watched too, because a rising butter price signalled stress in everyday life. A new kind of benchmark appeared, one number that claimed to represent the nation's table. As factory work spread, more families depended on a weekly wage instead of a harvest. That change made food prices feel like a verdict on whether pay actually meant security. Butter mattered because it sat right on the border between treat and necessity. When its price climbed, it did not sound like an abstract market shift. It sounded like the household budget had just lost a piece of itself. In growing cities, rent and fuel already ate up cash, so groceries became the quickest place to feel pressure. The butter price turned into an easy test. If workers could not afford it, then something in the new economy had failed them. Newspapers tracked it, shopkeepers explained it, and families compared it week to week. A small change per pound translated into a clear message about shrinking living standards. Political movements seized that clarity. Parties and unions used butter costs as a blunt public yardstick for fairness because it let them turn complicated questions into one hard number. If wages rose but butter still slipped out of reach, they called it a pay cut in disguise. If butter became cheaper, they claimed proof of good policy. A simple spread became a quick way to accuse, defend, and rally. When World War I began, butter stopped being just a farm and market story and became a wartime problem. Shipping lanes broke down under blockades and submarine attacks. Imports arrived late or not at all. At the same time, farms struggled to feed their cows because grain and oilcake went to armies and horses first. Less feed meant less milk. Less milk meant less butter. Scarcity moved fast from ports and farms to city kitchens. Governments faced a choice they had avoided in peacetime: let prices soar or step in. They stepped in. Butter came under price controls, and rules followed about who could buy it and how much. Rationing did not feel abstract. It reached straight into meals. A fixed allowance turned butter into a measured privilege, handed out by the state, not simply bought with wages. The market no longer decided the daily spread. Officials did. Once butter entered the ration book, it carried political weight. If the allowance shrank, people blamed the government, even when the real cause sat far away in broken supply lines. If the controlled price stayed low, farmers complained they were being squeezed. If it rose, city families felt punished. Butter became a lever. By adjusting supply, price, and access, the state shaped diets and signaled whose needs mattered most. After the First World War, governments faced a simple problem with no simple answer. Farmers needed stable income after years of disruption. City families needed food they could actually afford. Butter sat right in the middle. If prices rose, ministers heard about it fast. If prices fell, farm groups warned of ruin. Every policy choice landed like a verdict on who mattered more. States tried to manage the squeeze with tools that sounded technical but felt personal. Minimum prices protected producers. Subsidies lowered the shop price without cutting the farm gate price. Import rules and marketing boards shaped what entered the market and who controlled distribution. But whenever butter became scarce, people did not blame weather or feed costs. They blamed favoritism. Shortage meant the system served someone else. Politics then turned butter into proof. When governments backed farmers, opponents pointed to city queues and said workers paid the bill. When governments held prices down, rural regions said their livelihoods got sacrificed to keep urban voters calm. Even relief measures sparked suspicion because someone always seemed to receive help first. Butter stopped being just a food. It became a running test of fairness between classes. During World War II, rationing did not just return, it hardened into a system. Governments measured butter the way they measured fuel and metal, because milk and feed had to serve the war first. Coupons decided who bought what and when. Shops stopped being places of choice and became places of allocation. Butter, once a normal grocery item, became a controlled substance with a paper trail. To make that control feel acceptable, states pushed propaganda that framed scarce butter as a test of loyalty. Posters and radio messages linked restraint to troops and victory, and they praised substitutes as modern and patriotic. The rules reached into daily habits, down to baking and breakfast. But the tighter the system became, the more it exposed who bent it. Equality sounded good. Enforcement rarely looked equal. Black markets grew in the gaps between official promises and real hunger. Extra butter moved through favors, cash, and quiet networks, and the price jumped far beyond the printed ceiling. People with money, connections, or access to farms found ways around the coupons. Others did not. In the end, butter carried a new meaning, not just sacrifice, but a visible map of inequality during wartime. When the fighting ended, the controls did not simply disappear. Ration books, fixed prices, and state purchasing stayed in place because markets still failed. Farms needed animals, feed, and machinery. Cities needed calories fast. So Reconstruction-era governments kept the wartime levers, not out of habit, but because letting go risked chaos. Butter stayed tightly managed, and that management became a test of whether peace actually worked. At the same time, welfare expanded. States paid family allowances, subsidized basic foods, and organized distribution, so that survival did not depend on cash alone. Butter mattered here because it felt like more than survival. It signaled normal life returning. Leaders understood that. If they could raise rations, lower prices, or keep shelves supplied, they proved competence. If they failed, every missing pat of butter looked like broken promises. So butter became a political certificate of legitimacy. Governments talked about it in plain terms, not grand plans, but everyday comfort delivered to ordinary households. More butter meant peace had produced something real. Less butter meant the state still controlled life, yet could not provide. In elections and debates, success sounded simple and measurable. It came down to whether the post-war order could turn sacrifice into a shared reward. In the Cold War, everyday comfort turned into a scoreboard. Butter did not just taste like home. It stood for whether a system delivered. Leaders and newspapers treated it like evidence you could hold in your hand. If shops stayed stocked, it meant farms, factories, transport, and wages all worked well enough. If butter vanished, the problem looked bigger than food. It looked like failure, made visible at breakfast. This was where butter became a political weapon. Western governments pointed to full dairy cases and stable prices as proof that their model produced plenty, not just for elites, but for ordinary families. They linked abundance to choice and rising living standards. On the other side, shortages and queues became a vulnerability opponents could highlight, even when governments claimed they prioritized different goals. Butter turned into a simple question with a sharp edge. Who managed daily life better? The comparison did not stop at the grocery counter. Butter also became a way to talk about military spending without saying it outright. Critics weighed butter against tanks and rockets, suggesting that resources poured into defense showed up as empty shelves at home. Supporters answered that sacrifice protected the future. Either way, butter served as shorthand. It reduced complex economies and ideologies into one concrete measure: comfort now or power later. By the late 20th century, many governments stepped back from direct control. Coupons faded, fixed prices loosened, and dairies answered more to competition than to ministries. Butter moved through bigger supply chains, and national markets started to link together. But that shift did not make butter just food. It changed who got blamed. When prices rose, families still felt it immediately, and voters still demanded answers. Trade blocs and new farm policies reshaped the rules. Support payments, export refunds, and import limits decided what farmers produced and what shoppers paid. Even when shelves looked full, surpluses built up, then got dumped abroad or stored at public cost, and critics attacked the waste. When reforms tried to cut those subsidies, farm protests followed. Butter became a budget fight on two fronts at once: the public purse and the checkout line. Globalized supply also meant globalized shocks. A bad season, a feed price jump, a disease scare, or a sudden surge in demand moved through the system fast. Butter prices spiked, bakeries and restaurants passed costs on, and households noticed the weekly shop changing. Politicians could no longer point to ration books, but they still faced the same pressure to act. The market ran the numbers, and butter still carried the politics. By the time butter sat in most supermarket aisles, the old drama of pure scarcity had faded. People expected it to be there, week after week, at a price that felt normal. That expectation carried weight. When the price climbed, it did not feel like a niche problem for dairy lovers. It read like a warning sign that everyday life had gotten more expensive. Inflation reached the fridge like a quiet tax. Feed, fuel, fertilizer, packaging, and electricity all rose, and butter absorbed those costs fast because it depended on so many links working at once. A truck delay, a labor shortage at a plant, a bad season for pasture, and shelves thinned in places that had not imagined running out. Modern abundance proved real, but it also proved fragile. Then the arguments shifted from quantity to meaning. Butter became part of wider fights over food policy. How to support farmers without raising prices, how to handle trade rules, and how health and climate goals should shape what people ate. Some pushed for cheaper staples, others for changing diets, and both sides treated butter as evidence. It stayed common, but it kept its power to divide.